My name is Julia Foster. I'm 31, and today I buried my father. Cancer took him in 3 merciless months. Fast, brutal, leaving no room for preparation. I stood in front of the congregation, trembling only slightly, and gave the eulogy. I spoke of his woodworking, his terrible jokes that somehow still made me laugh, the way he taught me to change a tire when I was 12. My voice cracked once, twice, but I pushed through. Returning to my pew, still damp-eyed, I noticed Evan, my husband of 6 years, sitting quietly, hands folded, face unreadable. For a moment, I wanted to think he was just grieving, but something in the way he avoided my gaze made my stomach tighten. As I slid back into the pew, he leaned in, just enough for me to hear, and whispered, "We need to talk after this." I nodded. In that moment, my grief hadn't dulled my intuition. There was something off. I forced myself to remain calm. The service ended, and people began filing out, offering condolences. My mother was crumpled in her sister's arms, and I tried to hold it together. Yet Evan stayed close, following me silently. I noticed his slight smirk as he fumbled with a manila envelope tucked inside his briefcase. Near the back of the church, away from prying eyes, he finally spoke. "I think this is actually perfect timing," he said casually, as though discussing the weather. "What is?" I asked, though my voice was steady, betraying none of the cold storm gathering inside me. He drew the envelope from his briefcase. "I want a divorce. I've been thinking about it for months, and I figured now, right after your father's funeral, would be a clean way to start fresh. New chapter for both of us." For a fraction of a second, the words hung in the air, heavy and absurd. My father's casket was 20 feet away, and Evan chose this precise moment. My first thought wasn't anger, it was crystalline clarity. "You're right about timing," I said, my voice quiet, controlled. His relief was almost comical. "I'm glad you're being mature about this," he said. I reached into my bag, retrieving my phone, and flipped to a photo. I held it up between us. It was a scanned page from our prenuptial agreement, the one he'd clearly forgotten about. "Remember this?" I asked softly. His face drained of color. It was the page outlining the $200,000 penalty clause for infidelity. He'd insisted on it himself, just to keep us honest, he had said once, smirking. Before he could stammer, a voice came from behind us. "Good afternoon." We turned. My attorney stood there, impeccably dressed in dark navy, briefcase in hand. 2 days ago, I'd hired a private investigator. Evan's suspicious habits over the last 8 months had not gone unnoticed. The PI worked fast, and my lawyer now held every piece of concrete evidence: text messages, hotel receipts, photographs. "We're prepared to file a countersuit for adultery," my lawyer said firmly. "The prenup clause will be enforced in full." Evan went pale, his smugness vanishing into panic. You had me followed?" he whispered, disbelief lacing every word. "Yes," I replied calmly. "I became concerned last month when your pattern of late Tuesday and Thursday nights became suspicious. The evidence confirms my concerns." You can't." "We can, and we will," my lawyer interrupted. "The $200,000 will be deducted from your share of marital assets, and my client will also be seeking full ownership of the house and his separate investments." Evan glanced around. People were noticing now. His face flickered between panic and rage. He grabbed my arm. "You're really going to do this? Make a scene at my father's funeral?" "I'm just responding to your timing," I said evenly. My lawyer handed him a business card. "All communication now goes through me." Evan snatched it, shoved the divorce papers back in his briefcase, and stormed out, leaving whispers in his wake. My mother came up to me, trembling. What was that about?" "Let's get through today first," I said. Inside, a quiet fire had ignited. I was done being blindsided. Time to handle this my way. As I watched him leave, I reflected on the last months. The subtle shifts, the excuses, the late nights cloaked in office work, the laughter with someone else I'd never meet. I felt grief, yes, but also a strange, almost serene sense of empowerment. The first week was brutal in its own quiet way. The funeral already felt like a lifetime ago. Evan called and texted incessantly. I didn't answer. Every attempt at contact went through my attorney. The PI's full report arrived. 8 months of infidelity, 14 hotel stays, manipulated weekends, and text messages plotting the divorce during my grief. His attempt to ambush me had failed. I remembered my father's advice, found in a letter tucked in his workshop months before his diagnosis. If someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. Don't make excuses. Don't wait for them to do it again. He hadn't known about Evan. He didn't know I'd be blindsided at his funeral, but somehow he knew I'd need that clarity, that courage. And I did. The days after the funeral were a surreal blur. I moved through them like a ghost, each step measured, each word carefully chosen. Evan's calls went unanswered, his texts ignored. I let them pile up in my phone, silent reminders of his audacity. I didn't need to respond. I had my plan. I started by calling my attorney, explaining in calm, precise terms everything the PI had uncovered. Hotel receipts showing 14 overnight stays, text messages plotting the divorce while I grieved, secret weekend trips, romantic dinners billed to my shared credit card. Each detail reinforced the reality. Evan's betrayal wasn't impulsive. It was meticulously calculated, and he'd chosen the worst possible moment to strike. As I spoke, a strange serenity settled over me. For months, I had felt the subtle cracks in our marriage, the forced smiles over dinners, the late nights at work, the phone always face down. Now, those suspicions had hardened into proof, and for the first time, I felt a sense of power I hadn't known I was capable of. Evan won't know what hit him, I said quietly to myself, recalling my father's words. Don't wait for them to do it again. Later that day, my attorney arrived at my apartment. We went over strategy, meticulously organizing the evidence, crafting a timeline of deception. Each hotel stay, each text, each manipulated weekend was documented and cross-referenced. My plan was simple: enforce the prenup, claim damages for adultery, and ensure Evan's manipulations could not continue. When Evan finally tried to reach me in person, showing up at my doorstep, I didn't flinch. I spoke through the Ring camera. "This is ridiculous," he shouted. "You're blowing this out of proportion." I stayed calm. I knew exactly what he was attempting: guilt, manipulation, panic. "I'm enforcing what we agreed upon," I said evenly. "The prenup exists for a reason. Your actions triggered it." His face contorted, a mix of rage and disbelief. You had me followed. You hired a private investigator. This is insane." "Yes," I said. "I confirm the truth of your 8-month affair. And yes, I will proceed accordingly." He stared at the camera, silent for a moment, as if processing the reality he had ignored for months. Then his voice softened into a bitter laugh. "You're really going to do this?" "Yes," I said simply. "I am." I watched as he stormed off, leaving a swirl of whispered judgment and gossip behind him. People would talk. They always do. But that didn't matter. The truth was on my side. The evidence was concrete. My resolve was absolute. Over the next few days, my mother called incessantly, worried that my pursuit of justice was cruel, even merciless. "Julia, maybe you're being too harsh," she said. "It was your father's funeral. Surely, you could wait." I listened and then replied with quiet conviction. I already waited. I let him manipulate me for months. I let him take advantage of my grief. Now I act on my own terms. Today, tomorrow, always on my own terms. My father had taught me that strength wasn't loud or aggressive. It was calculated, patient, and unwavering. And I intended to honor that lesson. Every call, every document, every interaction would be deliberate. No impulsive anger, no public spectacle, only truth and strategy. Meanwhile, I reviewed the PI's report again. Each photo, each message, each receipt burned into my memory, not with bitterness, but with clarity. Evan had believed he could manipulate a grieving widow into signing away her rights, all while hiding an affair. He hadn't accounted for one thing: my composure. I made a list of all the public appearances, messages, and potential witnesses documenting everything. Every move Evan made to manipulate the narrative, every attempt to cast me as the unstable, grieving wife would be anticipated and neutralized. By the end of the week, the first cracks in Evan's arrogance were visible. Friends and colleagues whispered about him, noting his growing frustration. I stayed above it all, unshaken. The plan was working. I didn't need to confront him directly. The evidence did the talking. That night, I found a quiet corner in my father's study, his old leather chair, the scent of sawdust and varnish still lingering. I opened a drawer and found another letter he had left me, folded carefully, dated months before his diagnosis. "Remember who you are. Kindness is strength, but never let cruelty go unanswered." I smiled faintly, holding the words close. I had the strength, the clarity, and the evidence. Now it was only a matter of time. The battle had begun, but it would be on my terms, not his. 3 weeks had passed since my father's funeral, but it felt like 3 years. The quiet aftermath of grief had erupted into a storm of legal filings, accusations, and public scrutiny. Evan's arrogance had not dimmed. If anything, it had grown more desperate, more reckless. He had filed motions claiming emotional distress, accusing me of harassment and aggressive tactics. I watched, silently, as his family tried to weaponize my grief against me. His mother called me controlling and manipulative. His brother showed up at my office, screaming about how I was destroying Evan's life. The security team escorted him out. Even his father had called my mother, lecturing her about raising a vindictive daughter. I listened to the chaos from my apartment, a cup of tea in hand, letting the noise wash over me. I had the proof, the evidence, the strategy. Their words were empty, their attempts transparent. I had anticipated this. Each public smear, each accusation was a predictable step in Evan's plan, a plan now unraveling because I had anticipated it. The private investigator's report became my shield and my sword. Every hotel receipt, every credit card statement, every recovered text message, evidence of 8 months of betrayal was cataloged. The timeline was irrefutable. 14 overnight stays, weekends claimed for family visits, but spent in luxury hotels. Texts between Evan and his colleague, laughing about my grief, about timing it perfectly, about manipulating me into signing away my rights. I spent nights going through each message, reading the precise cruelty in their planning. It was like watching a meticulous blueprint of betrayal unfold. But instead of bitterness, I felt calm vindication. Evan had underestimated me. He had counted on my grief making me weak. He was wrong. The preliminary court hearing was looming. The judge would determine the validity of the prenup and the enforceability of the infidelity clause. Every detail mattered. I prepared meticulously, with my attorney reviewing cross-examination strategies, evidence presentation, witness lists. Meanwhile, Evan continued his public performance. He portrayed me as unstable, grief-stricken, vindictive. He claimed my countersuit was revenge, that my calls, my emails, my strategic silence were harassment. His lawyer painted me as a woman overwhelmed by emotion, acting out of anger. But reality spoke louder than lies. My evidence spoke for itself. Evan's 8-month affair, his meticulous plotting, his attempt to ambush me at my father's funeral. Everything he claimed as distress caused by me was a mirror reflecting his own deceit. I remembered my father's letters, tucked carefully in his study, words of quiet wisdom guiding me through every interaction. Stand firm. Strength is measured not by anger, but by resolve. Do not let cruelty go unanswered. When the day of the hearing arrived, I felt a strange mixture of grief and calm determination. Evan appeared, perfectly composed, playing the part of the wounded husband. His mother sat behind him, nodding in feigned sympathy. Their game was predictable, rehearsed, but now they faced truth and evidence, not my emotional reaction. The hearing began with his lawyer arguing that the prenup had been signed under duress, that circumstances had changed, that enforcing it now was punitive. They painted me as manipulative, suggesting I exploited my father's death to gain sympathy. Then, the evidence. My attorney presented the prenup, proving that the infidelity clause was my idea, enforced with independent legal counsel, signed freely by both of us. Hotel receipts, text messages, photographs from the PI, overwhelming and detailed, were laid before the court. The messages between Evan and his colleague, discussing the timing of the divorce and mocking my grief, were particularly damning. Evan's mother tried to testify, casting me as controlling, claiming I had orchestrated everything. Lies. Easily disproved. My attorney cross-examined her, forcing admissions about her daughter's 8-month affair and the timing of the divorce papers at a funeral. Then it was my turn. I spoke simply, clearly, without theatrics. I described the ambush at my father's funeral, the discovery of the affair, the prenup, and my measured response. I did not lash out. I did not plead. I presented facts, letting the evidence do the emotional work for me. The judge paused, scanned the documents, listened to every word. You could feel the temperature in the room shift as reality sank in. Evan's carefully crafted narrative crumbled under the weight of truth. The recess came and went. When the judge returned, his voice was steady. The prenup was valid, the infidelity clause enforceable, the evidence overwhelming. The $200,000 penalty stood, and because Evans and his mother's testimony had been proven false, they were sanctioned for wasting the court's time. Legal fees were their responsibility. The house remained mine as separate property. Division of other marital assets would proceed, but the penalty was enforced first. Evan's face betrayed disbelief, rage, and panic, all in one expression. His colleague waited by his car. The two of them departed together, leaving Evan exposed, humiliated. My mother hugged me, whispering, "Your father would be proud of you." I nodded, letting the quiet triumph sink in. Victory wasn't about celebration. It was about justice, strategy, and dignity. I walked out of that courthouse knowing the hardest battles were over, but also that my life, my grief, and my strength had been tested in ways I never imagined. I had stood firm, even when the world expected me to crumble, and I had won. The courthouse doors closed behind me, leaving the echo of my footsteps in the marble hall. The battle wasn't just legal. It had been a test of patience, strategy, and restraint. My father was gone, my marriage had ended, and yet, for the first time in months, I felt a clarity I hadn't known since his diagnosis. I was in control of my life again. The final divorce decree would take weeks, but the critical victory had been secured. Evan's attempts to manipulate, to humiliate, to gaslight had collapsed under the weight of proof, preparation, and principle. The $200,000 infidelity clause would be enforced. The house remained mine, and the truth of his betrayal was now undeniable to anyone who cared to see. I sat in my car, staring at the courthouse steps, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and quiet triumph. The emotional wounds from the past months, funeral, betrayal, public scrutiny, still throbbed, but they no longer dictated my actions. I had acted deliberately, strategically, and with integrity. Evan's colleague, the person at the center of the betrayal, had disappeared from the picture. Friends reported she was already moving on, leaving Evan exposed and isolated. Poetic justice, in a way. He had gambled that I would be too grief-stricken, too shaken, too exhausted to respond. But I had followed the plan my father's wisdom had guided me toward. Observe, document, act. At home, I found another letter of his, tucked into the saw case in his workshop. The words were simple, but they resonated deeper than ever. Never let anyone mistake your kindness for weakness. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is stand up for yourself, even when it hurts. I held the paper close, letting the warmth of his voice guide me. He had prepared me, unknowingly, for this exact moment. Over the next few weeks, Evan's attempts to negotiate or manipulate further were shut down by my attorney. He offered to drop the divorce entirely if I relinquished the infidelity clause, an empty gesture, meaningless now. I had the upper hand, and I did not hesitate to use it. Social circles, colleagues, and mutual friends watched as Evan's carefully constructed facade crumbled. He had tried to control the narrative, casting me as the emotional, irrational party, but the truth was evident in every text, every hotel receipt, every photograph. I had been calm, measured, and unwavering. Therapy became my refuge. I processed grief, betrayal, and the complex emotions of reclaiming my life. Each session reminded me that strength wasn't about vengeance. It was about justice and dignity. Selling the house was bittersweet. It held memories of my father and echoes of a marriage that had ended in betrayal. Yet as I packed, I felt lighter, free, unshackled from the weight of manipulation and deceit. Evan, stripped of his assets, the affair's distraction, and the illusion of control, was left to face the consequences of his choices. The colleague, once a source of his calculated infidelity, had vanished. He was isolated, exposed, and accountable. I stood in the empty living room one last time, letting the silence wash over me. My life was no longer dictated by grief, by betrayal, or by someone else's manipulations. I had won. Not with anger, not with spectacle, but with calm strategy, preparation, and moral clarity. A new chapter awaited, not the one Evan had imagined, not one dictated by deceit or cruelty, but mine to write, on my terms, with dignity intact. I whispered a quiet goodbye to the past. You wanted a fresh start, I said softly. You got one, just not the one you planned. And for the first time in months, I smiled, not triumphantly, not vindictively, but with a sense of peace, justice, and empowerment.